Someone loves you, and you're already preparing for when they stop. That's not anxiety. That's a child who learned that love and loss always arrive together. In this video, I'm going to show you 6 reasons, rooted in childhood psychology, that explain why you can't accept love without bracing for the moment it disappears. This is too good. Something is going to go wrong. You've had that thought, maybe not out loud. Maybe it lives just beneath the surface, a quiet hum running under every good moment in a relationship. Someone treats you well, and some part of you doesn't relax. It activates. It starts looking for cracks, not because you're ungrateful or self-sabotaging in some abstract sense, because your earliest experiences of love came with conditions you couldn't always meet, or with unpredictability you couldn't always survive. John Bowlby's attachment theory, one of the most rigorously supported frameworks in developmental psychology, describes how children form internal working models of relationships based on the consistency of their caregivers. When love was reliable, a child builds a model that says, connection is safe, I can trust it. When love was inconsistent, warm one day, withdrawn the next, present and then suddenly absent, the model that forms is different. It says, love is unstable by nature, and the good moments are just the pause before something breaks. In adult life, that model runs automatically. A partner says something tender, and your body doesn't soften. It tightens. Because tenderness, historically, was followed by something that hurt. This isn't self-destruction. This is what happens when a child's nervous system learns that the arrival of warmth is also the beginning of the countdown. I keep waiting for them to realize they made a mistake choosing me. This thought is so common among people with certain childhood histories that it has a name. Psychologists refer to it as the imposter dynamic within intimate relationships. The deep, persistent belief that the love being offered is based on a version of you that isn't real, and that exposure is only a matter of time. Where does that come from? It comes from growing up in a home where your worthiness of love felt conditional, where affection was awarded for performance, for being good, quiet, successful, easy, undemanding, and quietly withdrawn when you fell short of whatever the standard was that day. You didn't grow up feeling loved for existing. You grew up feeling loved for behaving. And that distinction matters enormously. When love is a reward for behavior, you never fully believe it's really about you. Because the you that gets loved is always the curated version, the compliant version, the version that has successfully hidden all the difficult parts. So when someone loves you now, freely, without obvious conditions, your brain doesn't receive it as safety. It receives it as a test you haven't failed yet. This isn't insecurity. This is what happens when a child is taught that their unedited self is too much to be loved as it is. If I let myself need them, it'll hurt more when they go. The logic is airtight from where you're standing. Don't fully arrive. Don't fully invest. Keep one foot out the door, and the fall won't be as far. This is what researchers in attachment science call the avoidant adaptation, a strategy developed in early childhood by kids whose emotional needs were consistently met with dismissal, discomfort, or absence. The caregiver was physically present maybe, but emotionally unavailable. When you reached for closeness, there was nothing to grab. Over time, the child stops reaching. Not because the need disappears, it doesn't, but because reaching came to feel more dangerous than not having the thing at all. In adult relationships, that adaptation looks like emotional withholding that you disguise as independence. It looks like being the person who never asks for anything, who handles everything alone, who seems low maintenance, but is actually just running a very old subroutine that says, needing people is what gets you hurt. The cruelest part is that the strategy works, in a narrow sense. If you never fully let someone in, they can never fully break you when they leave. But the cost is that you never fully get to be in the relationship either. You're present in body and partially present in heart because some old part of you is already at the exit, quietly keeping the engine running. This isn't emotional unavailability. This is what happens when a child learns that needing love is the most dangerous thing love can make you do. Now stop for a second. How many of these do you recognize? Because most people watching this aren't incapable of love. They're not broken or damaged beyond reach. They're someone who once loved completely, got hurt in ways they were too young to process, and built the most logical defense system a child could build. The problem isn't that the system failed. The problem is that it worked, and now it won't turn off. When they're too nice, I get suspicious. What do they want? Healthy love should feel like relief. For you, it sometimes feels like a setup. Someone is consistently kind, consistently present, consistently choosing you. And instead of settling into it, you find yourself analyzing the angle, looking for the hidden cost. What are they getting out of this? When does the bill arrive? This response has a clinical foundation. It's often seen in individuals who experienced what developmental psychologists call unpredictable reinforcement in childhood, an attachment environment where love and pain came from the same source, and often without clear pattern. A parent who was your safe haven 1 hour and the source of distress the next. A home where warmth was real, but so was the volatility, and you never knew which version of love was walking through the door. Unpredictable reinforcement is, psychologically, one of the most powerful conditioning forces that exists. It creates hypervigilance. It trains the brain to never fully relax in the presence of the thing it needs most, because relaxing is exactly when you get caught off guard. So you scan, you test, you interpret neutral or positive behavior as potentially coded, not because you're paranoid, but because you were trained in the most formative years of your life that kindness has a hidden side. This isn't trust issues. This is what happens when love and unpredictability lived at the same address for so long you forgot they could ever be separated. I push people away right when things start getting real. The relationship is good, genuinely good. And then something shifts. You pick a fight over nothing. You go cold. You create distance so efficiently, it almost looks deliberate. Because it is, just not consciously. This is the self-sabotage pattern that psychologists link directly to what's known as disorganized attachment. The attachment style that develops when the person a child needs for safety is also the person causing fear. When your earliest experience of closeness was simultaneously an experience of threat, your nervous system gets wired with a fundamental contradiction. I need this person, and this person is dangerous. That internal conflict doesn't resolve in childhood. It travels with you. In adult relationships, it activates right at the threshold of real intimacy, the point where vulnerability becomes unavoidable. Because vulnerability is where you got hurt before, not in the early, easy stages of connection, but deep in, when the walls were down and someone had full access. So when a relationship reaches that depth, your system doesn't celebrate. It sounds an alarm. And the most efficient response to that alarm is to create the ending yourself, on your terms, before it can happen on theirs. At least that way you saw it coming. At least that way you were in control of the one thing that was never in your control as a child. This isn't fear of commitment. This is what happens when intimacy and injury shared the same space for so long that your body can't tell them apart. Even when I believe they love me, I can't fully let it land. This might be the hardest one to hear. Not because it's the most painful, though it is, but because it describes something that has no obvious fix, no single behavior to point to. You've done the thinking. You know rationally that this person is safe. You've looked at the evidence. You've talked yourself through it. And still, somewhere just below the surface, the love doesn't quite reach. It sits at the door, but doesn't fully come inside. This is what trauma researchers describe as emotional detachment from positive experience, a state where the brain's threat response system has been so thoroughly conditioned by early painful attachment that it now partially blocks the full neurological experience of safety and warmth, even when the threat is genuinely absent. The technical term that underlies this is hyperactivated stress response. The amygdala, trained on years of early relational pain, processes even positive emotional input through a filter of threat assessment. You don't experience love cleanly. You experience it through the memory of every time love became loss. And that memory doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up as a thought you can argue with. It shows up as a feeling, a faint, persistent sense that the good thing you're inside right now is somehow not quite real, not quite yours, not quite safe to fully inhabit. This isn't emotional numbness. This is what happens when a child's capacity for joy in connection gets worn down by a world that kept taking the connection away. Here's what none of this means. It doesn't mean you're unlovable. It doesn't mean the relationships you've half lived weren't real, or that the people you've kept at arm's length were right to go. It means that somewhere along the way, love taught you its worst lessons before it had the chance to teach you its better ones. You learned rupture before repair. You learned loss before longing. You learned to protect yourself from the ending before you ever got to stay long enough to find out if one was coming. And that protection has a cost, not just to your relationships, but to you, to the version of you that sits inside a good moment and can't be fully there for it. That counts the seconds until it ends instead of living inside the seconds while they're happening. The vigilance that kept you safe also kept you just slightly out of reach of the thing you were trying to protect. What would change? Not tomorrow, not after some long process, if you finally stopped treating love like a threat you hadn't identified yet?